Welcome, friends. Whether you're out on a walk, running errands, or relaxing at home, it's wonderful to connect with you. Joining us today is Dr. Albert Bramante. Now, Dr. Bramante is a talent agent with more than 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. He holds a PhD in psychology from Walden University and is a certified hypnotist and NLP practitioner. Dr. Bramante, welcome to Phoenix and Flame.
Thank you so much, Dana, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, let's just start and look at all of these. One of the things that attracted me to you and wanted to have you as a guest on Phoenix and Flame are all of the different talents, the abilities that you hold, the experiences that you have. You wouldn't necessarily put all those together. How in the world did you end up with a PhD in psychology and also a talent agent, hypnotist? I really want to hear your story.
Yeah, well, you know, they happen at different times in my life. Some simultaneously. Some things happen simultaneously. So I'll start off from the beginning. I was always into science, the mind, and all of that. So I started studying reading books about the brain, the nervous system, neurology, in high school, and I really became interested in it. And so I decided I was going to major in psychology during my undergrad years. Also, during high school, I was involved in a drama club, and then during my undergrad, I took some electives in theater and acting, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. So I, after I got my master's degree, I was working in New York City. That's where I'm, near where I am, and I started, you know, kind of looking to performing arts again because that's like one of the performing arts capital, in the country.
Mhm.
So I, was looking into, well, maybe I want to become an actor, do something on the side as a hobby. And I realized, it wasn't really for me as an actor. So, but I loved working with actors. I loved being around creative people. But I also like, love psychology, love the mind, love the human mind, the complexity of humans. So I became, just obsessed with like learning, and learning new things. So I said, I might as well go for my PhD. I already have my master's, and I always like to have a fallback plan, even though I was starting my talent business now. I decided to go back for a PhD, and I did it at a Walden University. I received my PhD, and while I was working on conceptualizing my dissertation or coming up with the idea, I was trying to solve a problem that I was facing with my actors, and I was noticing a lot of actors were self-sabotaging,
Mm.
and that led me to being, studying, fear of success and self-defeating behavior in performing artists, and that was the subject of my dissertation.
I was going to ask you if you were able to use that for your dissertation. That would have been on a platter. I mean, that would have been perfect for you.
It was, and they loved it. And when I received my PhD in 2015, my advisors at the time recommended that I publish, somehow, and and it took me several years later, but that's where it turned into my book Rise Above the Script because it was based on the work that I did for my dissertation.
Wonderful. Now, when you were running across self sabotage, what were some of the examples that you were noticing in the actors and the people in the performing arts? Why would you think, or why were they self sabotaging?
Um, why? That's why I did my dissertation. It was like I was trying to figure out what was happening because I was getting a disconnect. Like these actors were telling me how much they wanted to work, but yet on the other hand, I was hearing, their actions were totally different.
Okay.
And so I couldn't figure out what was really happening here. Why was this happening? why was this, these actors' actions not matching their verbal, not congruent with their verbal. So, but the examples would be like not, blowing off auditions, not showing up for auditions, not preparing for auditions, pretty much taking themselves out of the running for a job before they even before it even began. And it was like
Uh,
them shooting themselves in the foot in a sense.
Why do you think they were doing that?
Um, a lot of it came down to fear. Fear of failure, fear of success, and also, because one of the things I did for my dissertation, one of the things I looked at was personality, and particularly within personality, I looked at the 5-factor model of the big five, what they call it, in personality, which is pretty much the 5 traits that all humans got to share. Starting with openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And the biggest finding that I think, that I found really statistically and empirically was that if you combine high neuroticism and low in conscientiousness, it's going to be a recipe for self-sabotage. So
Hmm.
you take somebody who scores high in the, anxiety prone and but low on the discipline and focus, they're more likely going to, self-sabotage because they're going to be giving into the fears.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And so you were in a position with your knowledge and your interest in that, and also in the lane of working with performance artists. How were you able to apply that to help them be able to overcome
Mm-hmm. Well, I
any of
think
those feelings?
the first step is to realize, what was happening, and to kind of, bridge the understanding of fear because if it's not conscious, it's hard to recognize.
Mhm.
So it might come up and manifest itself with like, oh, this audition is not going to be worth my time. I don't like the project. I don't agree with the project. And what's really happening is that it's really fear that is working as a protective mechanism. So fear, is not it is really a helpful emotion because it protects us. Now it can be misguided sometimes and overly, be overprotective, but nonetheless, it's a protective mechanism. And so I kind of look at it like, just helping the actor or, you know, and or anyone who's dealing with this to realize, what that it's fear based. And
Mhm.
once you understand that it's fear based, you can start to unravel and change the pattern once, but it takes a lot of times insight, sometimes working with a coach or a therapist to kind of recognize a subconscious pattern. So, there's a lot of actors because there's the feeling um, is sort of the feeling in a sense um, with actors in a sense is there's a lot of no's. It's an overly competitive, highly competitive industry, and so a lot of actors when they're young, they come out of school, they come out of getting a bachelor's of fine arts or master's of fine art performing, and the bright eyes are happy, they're excited, but yet multiple times they're hearing the word no
Yeah.
or being told, you know, not today and all that. We'll start to add and build up and build up and build up to a point where you start self doubting. It's like, what's the point anymore of this? So there's, just in general, there's a high turnover rate with actors.
I think you bring up excellent points because I'm thinking about my listeners and what they might be experiencing on their journeys as they're listening to you right now. And you mentioned that fear is a protective mechanism. And I'm thinking back to a comment that you made earlier, and I'm wondering, fear protecting them against failure.
Mm-hmm.
What do they feel like? The fear is protecting them against failure, and then when it happens over and over again, then comes self doubt. And so that happens in life, right? And so you kind of jump out there and you get told no, and you fail, whatever means. So if you want to kind of hover over your wisdom and your experience and what you run into with your clients and people you're working with that experience multiple no's, which they might interpret as failure. But if we also kind of weave in a little bit of neuroplasticity, we could also possibly reframe that kind of experience.
Yeah, and that's where like the NLP comes in, the neuro linguistic programming, because it's rewiring new connections. So part of that, we start with the language that you use, or that you, and this is not just for actors, for anybody who's listening. Watch how you describe yourself. Take stock in how you describe yourself to other people, how you introduce yourself. So very often, a lot of actors have the romanticized notion of a starving artist or a struggling artist. And that has to change, because that's where it starts to begin. Because then when you identify it, it's part of your identity. So when you say I'm a starving artist, that kind of means you're saying to the world you're poor,
Mm.
and that you have a poor mindset. So we change that to a degree where it's you're a professional working actor, or you're a professional. You're not aspiring, you're not struggling, you're not starving. You're a professional working actor. And when you start to kind of act as if, in a sense, it starts to rewire neurology over time. So, if we're teaching somebody confidence, for instance, first thing we might do is learning how to project confidence physically in your body. Um, there's, a lot of research that's like power poses, for instance, for confidence. If you look at the research, like with Amy Cuddy and all that, and it's all about the thing about um about power poses, in a sense. So it's about taking your neurology, in a sense, and acting it, so it's like act as if.
I love the power poses. Now, doesn't the research indicate that it only takes about, gosh, it's not very long. I mean, it's a very short period of, I think it's under 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's really only 2 minutes. If you think about it, and then you could do that before a presentation, just even when you get up in the morning. Take 2 minutes, in the shower or the bath, take stand in a power pose for 2 minutes. And, right before you're about to give a presentation, or, give it, or go live online or live in video, go into the bathroom, wherever it is, and just do a power pose for 2 minutes and hold it. Because you're changing neurology automatically. You're changing your nervous system. And it's so simple, but so powerful at the same time.
That's right. There's actually, I don't know if you ever watch Grey's Anatomy, but there's a surgeon on Grey's Anatomy, one of the characters that does a power pose before every surgery. I think Dr. Amelia Shepherd, I think was the character's name on Grey's Anatomy, that does the power pose between every surgery. That is amazing. So now let's get woven in here, because I want to pull up the hypnotism. Where did this come into play?
So I initially, during my studies, was going to study clinical psychology, and that's what I was going to school for. Um, I started with a PhD program in clinical psych, but to be honest with you, there was part of it that I started not resonating with me, with on the clinical side. The one thing was the long the focus on the pathology, which, again, I understand there's a need for that, but I would hear my professors in school be like, yeah, I was treating somebody with, access to personality disorder for, 8, 9 years, and we're currently making progress. And I'm thinking to myself, something's not adding up here. 8 or 9 years,
Uh,
and you're just making progress. Now, I'm not, gonna, sit here and trivialize access to disorders. They're very pervasive and profound and intricate. However, I'm thinking something's not right here. And I feel, and also I'm not a big fan of labeling people right off the bat because of the stigma
Mhm.
that can be associated with that. The
True.
stigma associated with that. So hypnosis comes in because it's a much more rapid approach. Now, it's still, I still think that psychotherapy is helpful and important, so especially for the trauma or if I have a deep seated, childhood trauma or things back into their past. But I also see with hypnosis, when you work with the subconscious mind, it um, kind of has a faster impact, more rapid change. And, even, Freud himself, he studied hypnosis initially. Wasn't very good at it, from what I hear, or wasn't really, couldn't really do that well with it. But still, nonetheless, it was even being studied in the late 1800s as a treatment modality. So, so I became interested, and actually, I was reading an article in Psychology Today. This was, during my early grad school years, and it said Lauren hypnotist. Okay, I'm interested. And so I took a video introductory course and was like, this really resonates with me. Rapid change. I was always for that. Um, and so I started studying. I took some certification classes and, in person in New York. That was like I took a 4-month certification class and became really interested in it.
I can see because I have done some inner child work, regression work with patients of my own,
Yes.
and it's amazing how you can see someone change quite rapidly in 1 or 2 sessions by being able to access the subconscious part of our minds. So, if you would take a few moments and kind of explain to my listeners who, when they hear the word hypnosis, it brings to mind the connotation of someone, walking around on stage quacking like a chicken. So,
Yeah. I can assure you that that's not it. Although that is entertaining, that's not it. Um, that's not what I do, and that's not, that's only one, application of it. We go into what I would call flow state. If you look at the original concept of flow, which is like when you're in a state of intense focus, like your energy is really zeroed on something and you're really feeling like on top of your game, that's what hypnosis is in the sense of process. So, and it could be just getting into a flow state to work on, whether it's, building the confidence, whether it's working on an addiction or healing the inner child, work. Hypnosis, I think, does very well in that type of modality, doing inner child work. And
mhm.
that's what really attracted me to hypnotherapy was inner child work, actually. And working with, really accessing the resources we have within. So one thing that, especially a humanistic psychologist to learn because if I'm going to look in traditional psychology, I identify more of the humanistic models. And that really refers to the fact that we have all the answers we need within us. Our inner guides, our intuition. So all hypnosis really is just tapping into that network. So like have the answers within, and as a facilitator or a coach, which is I don't really call myself a hypnotherapist. I call myself more of a coach or as a facilitator because it's really the client that's doing the work.
Mhm.
I'm just a guide.
Right.
I'm a mirror, and so we're helping the client reach their own answers within. And, that could be going back to something that happened and kind of like reparenting in a sense almost.
Mhm.
Like telling that inner child within you that everything's gonna be okay and that you're there and you're there to protect, him or her and that, tends to actually help, if it's done, if the client's totally aligned with it. Another misconception about hypnosis is that you can't Well, the truth is, you can't make anyone do anything that they won't do. You know, so you can't change free will. That's the one thing I will say off the bat. So, again, if I can't make someone cook a chicken who would normally wouldn't do that. Period. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to make anyone do anyone that they're morally opposed to doing because free will is most important. And the same thing goes with hypnotherapy. Now, the person has to be kind of open or receptive to it.
Mhm.
Even in traditional therapy, someone's coming in and saying, I'm here because my spouse or my parents or my partner, really wants to be here. It's like you're wasting your time because you're not going to be open to the work.
Mhm. It's been my experience too, kind of corroborating what you're saying as well, that in some of the regression and inner child work, that, you know, if the mind is not ready to process something, some level of trauma, some earlier experience, it simply will not happen. It doesn't matter what you say or in anything because like you said, we have the power from within and the mind is either going to do it or not, depending on if the mind is ready to process it.
Yeah, yeah, and they have to be, the mind is there. Remember, our subconscious is there to protect us.
Mhm.
So if we don't feel comfortable, like there's no strong rapport between the therapist and the client, and there no regret. Even if the client is consciously saying, "I'm ready to do this," but if the subconscious is saying, not so fast," that's exactly what's happening. And the important thing is that then we have to kind of talk with the client about what's happening here. What are their because maybe they have some slight fears or reservations about it, and we'll do that. Or it might not be a match between the particular therapist and a particular client. So
Mhm. I've seen that too. Now, I've noticed, and I'm wondering if you've noticed as well, that it seems like the majority of the significant fears are based in childhood experiences, childhood traumas. And so that when
yes,
you're able to do the hypnotic work, you're able to do the regression inner child work, that helps with fears that are manifesting in today as they're trying as an adult, as they're walking around trying to live their life as an adult, but they're being hamstrung by these fears that are based in something that they experienced many years ago.
yes, one that's exactly true. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. Is that they're that these fears are and these experiences, and even if you don't consciously remember or think you're affected by it, it can sometimes come up. Um, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a significant drama. A lot of times it could be these little micro traumas, day in the life
Mhm.
called dramas, which happens with every typical childhood.
Yep.
You know, um, your parents yell at you, or your parents say an insult at you because they're mad at their own, and they take their frustration out on you for the day. Or you get a teacher who, belittles you in class or humiliates you in class.
Yep. Yep.
And, you may think you're over it, but you're really not. You add a couple of those instances, they compound over time. So it's like there's a lot of times those day in the life traumas, which are not, they may not be glamorized, they may not be sensational, but they're still important.
Oh, yes, 100%. Absolutely, 100%. Now you had a concept, y the happy file that's from
Yeah,
your book. Can you explain the happy file and how we can use that? That's from your book, how we can use it to boost self-esteem and motivation and that type of thing.
sure. Um, so yeah. Um, so in other words, like for instance, when you take, for instance, a something that happened to you that's good, you document it. You take a journal and you write in it. You had a for my actors, you had a great audition. You had someone complimented your work. You write it, you document it. You get a good review on something you've done, you document it. And you take all these little slight successes, and therefore, you then are able to, pull it out, pull out your happy file when you start having your self doubt comes in. So you pull out your happy file and you remember what it is you set out to do. So, if you're a speaker, every time you get a compliment about how your presentation moved somebody or made an impact. So when these moments of self doubt come in, which they do at everybody,
Mhm.
you pull out your file, and you can't. It's like one of those things you can no longer be upset when you're looking at the positive feedback. It's like, oh, it means something.
I like that. I like how it gives us balance because we all know that sometimes we're going to get feedback that doesn't feel the greatest. But when there's something that we can also intentionally look at that is something that's positive, at least it helps us to balance that out and prevents us from going down into some kind of wormhole of negativity.
Hmm. Yeah. So definitely 100%.
Now, you had something else, another question that I was interested in. How do you differentiate between toxic high self esteem and healthy self esteem? What makes self esteem when it's high get so high that it's toxic?
Um. So a lot of times it's because there's a close cousin between low self-esteem. If you look at narcissism, for instance, that's kind of like another way of looking at narcissism. It's really fragile self-esteem, and it's like it's quite so related to low self-esteem to some level. So, because if you think about it, a person with a grandiosity, when they don't get that attention or that recognition,
Mhm.
it's a blow. In some circles we call that a narcissistic injury. Where it's like out, a huge blow, and so what I use a difference is there's a concept known as humility, which is like, okay, there's nothing wrong with having high self esteem, but you also know that you're not perfect, and that self esteem can bring things up too.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
And it's really uncomfortable, I believe, to be around individuals that have that fragility and they need so much attention and they will frequently manipulate situations and cause problems and cause drama so that they can then be the center of everyone's attention.
yeah, and when it comes to like self sabotage, because then it's like I can't be told constructive feedback. I'm perfect. How dare you, critique me? And for actors, part of like being successful actors, you have to be coachable, you have to be trainable. If you're not coachable because you believe that you're perfect, it's going to be a perfect recipe for self sabotage.
I find that interesting because if you think about actors and in the performing arts, on the one hand, you have actors that talk about how insecure they are and how scary it is. And it is, to put yourself in front of a bunch of people and risk all of that criticism and the backlash and everything when you feel like you've done your best. And that is terrifying. So that's on one side. And then you have another group of actors that maybe because of their success and the feedback that they've gotten and the yes men, maybe they've gotten some money, they're surrounded by yes men, sycophants, etc. and on, that they feel like everything
Hmm.
they do is perfect. They're not open to any kind of constructive criticism because everything they do is perfect. That's an interesting dichotomy, I find.
Yeah, it is a very interesting dichotomy in a sense.
Hmm. So, in the last minute or so that we have left, Dr. Bramante, I'd like for you to share with me along your journey. Have there been some times when you have experienced benefits from setting boundaries, from practicing healthy boundaries, and or have you experienced the consequences of a lack of boundaries, which some of us do?
Yeah, I would have to say all of the above. Is that answer. So um, one of the ideas for a book that I'm proposing, for myself is um, the martyr complex, which is the people please. And part of being a martyr is, well, the martyr archetype or complex is a people pleaser, And that was me growing up. Most of my, childhood, teenage, and early adult life was pleasing people, wanting people to like me. And I had no boundaries. And, I grew up in a house with no boundaries. And it cost me a lot, like in a sense, to my mental health. And so I believe it's important, to set boundaries and, for your own sanity. So that might mean, not always saying yes to everything. Because, if you're the temper, the listeners here, if you ever said yes to something when you really meant, whenever part of your being meant to say no,
Right.
whether it's working overtime, and I'll, I, one of my recent full-time job, which before owning a, business owner, I was I got hired as a tenure track, uh, community college professor. This is back in 2008 to 2013,
Right.
ish. So when I first started, this is, I really love teaching. I still do. I still teach part time, but I love teaching, full time. This was like my dream. And I didn't even realize the problem here when it was happening. But they kept asking me, "Would you like an extra class? We're short of faculty. Would you take an extra class?" And I'm like, "Sure, sure, sure. Extra committee work? Yeah, I love it here." And when I finally, after the whole thing was over years later, I took them back and I said, "Whoa, I really spread myself too thin because typical full time load for community faculty, college faculty is 5 boards in a semester. I had up to most semesters I was doing between 10 and 12.
Whoa.
Plus, I was teaching winter session, summer sessions, because I thought, and I was under the illusion that, oh, they're gonna love me. Yeah, I was on, instead of being on one committee, which it was supposed to be, I was on five. I was, and I got burnt out, physically, mentally, emotionally. I was just done, and I learned a really harsh lesson. And the harsh lesson I learned was it didn't get the intended outcome that I wanted, which is respect.
Interesting.
Because when they can't, they announced to everybody, during my fourth year, we're going to be making cuts, and we're going to have to cut, 2 faculty members from each department. So you can guess who was the first one that was cut.
Mm.
And now I'm not saying that would have changed the outcome if I didn't. I might have still been cut. Who knows? I can't. Okay, I don't know. But it was a huge wake up call for me. Like, okay, I went through all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't. It backfired, in a sense. And so, and then I've done a lot of research too, because a lot of times with people pleasers, there's resentment that comes up too. It's like I do all this and nobody's respecting me,
Mm-hmm.
and and it becomes part of that. So there's a big distinction between you could still be a very nice and generous person, but still have firm and set boundaries.
Yes,
So
100%.
so whether that's professionally, personally,
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with you setting boundaries. And if somebody does not want to accept those boundaries, that then you have to evaluate, is this person really worth my time? Because because a lot of people ask me, well, what if my boss doesn't, yells at me, for setting boundaries? I'm like, well, then that may not be a place you really want to be working at. That sounds like that might be a toxic work environment.
That's a good point. Lots of times you mentioned burnout earlier. Healthy boundaries help us to be able to keep going in a place. It helps us to stay someplace for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It helps us to keep going and not burn out. We don't get crispy, crunchy, and then we're out the door. Being one of the quiet quitters is just gone, because we've been able to set boundaries and we know how not to get ourselves burned out. And really, to be honest with you, I well, some of the most peaceful people that I know are the ones that are very good at their boundaries. They know
Yeah.
ex they know they're very comfortable with who they are, they're very comfortable with, letting other people do whatever they want, they don't take it personally, they don't get defensive about it, they understand the difference between what I call their yard and their neighbor's yard, and they're able to just keep going and stay full of energy to do what they wanna do. Now, Dr. Bramante, I wanna make sure that my listeners are able to get a hold of you. Now, what I have here is your website, which is albertbramante.com,
Yes.
or your
I'm also
Instagram.
and LinkedIn. Yes. So Instagram, I'm under Dr. Albermonte. What I could do is send you my link tree, which is kind of like everything, like my LinkedIn, my Instagram, my website, my link to my book, so that if listeners want to buy, want to get check out my book, they can.
Fabulous.
And it's easy to get a hold of me on those platforms.
Okay. Fabulous. Well, Dr. Bramante, I really appreciate you joining me here, giving me and my listeners your time and your expertise and your wisdom and sharing your story with us. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, I'm really happy. Thank you again, Dana, for inviting me.
Now, listeners, I know you have heard multiple things today that you're thinking, this is fantastic. I know a coworker, I have a best friend, I have a family member that needs to hear exactly what Dr. Albert Bramante had to say. Take this podcast episode, copy and paste the link, send it through text, send it through email, post it on your favorite social media sites so we can grow our Phoenix and Flame community and let people know you are not alone. I hope you're having a great day. I hope the rest of your day is fantastic. I'm Dana on Phoenix and Flame.